When my own son threw my suitcase out into the rain and yelled that I was nothing but a burden, something inside me died that night. At 72 years old, I found myself trembling beneath an overpass, watching the storm wash away the last fragment of my dignity. But what Matthew and his wife didn't know was that, as they discarded me like a worthless object, destiny was weaving a protective net that would take them by surprise. The woman they underestimated was about to become their worst nightmare. But before I continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories travel. The rain showed no mercy on that fateful night. It seemed as though the very sky was weeping with indignation over what was happening to me. I felt the impact of my suitcase as it slammed against the wet asphalt, a sound that would be etched into my memory forever. Matthew stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his face contorted in an expression of contempt I will never forget. No more words were needed. His silence screamed everything I needed to understand. I no longer had a place in his house. I no longer had a place in his life. Something within me refused to beg. With fingers stiffened by rheumatism, I picked up my already soaked suitcase and began to walk. My sandals made a squishy noise with every step as I walked away. No umbrella, no proper coat, just a thin sweater that had been warm and cozy only 2 hours before. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed like a final sentence. Curiously, I didn't cry that night. Instead, I walked until my legs gave out, finally finding refuge under a nearby interstate overpass. The concrete was cold and damp, but at least it partially shielded me from the relentless rain. I dragged my soaked suitcase to use it as a makeshift seat and leaned against the cold wall. The sounds of tires splashing through puddles were like a soundtrack to my humiliation. My body ached, but not as much as my heart. My joints felt like wet paper, fragile and brittle, and my heart felt like ashes. A few people walked past me, but no one gave me a second glance. To them, I was just another homeless elderly woman in a city that had plenty. This perception was what scared me the most. I no longer felt like myself. It was as if I had become invisible, disposable, just one more problem to be ignored. Matthew's voice echoed in my mind, the way he pronounced the word burden, as if I were an unwanted chore, an inconvenient item on a to-do list. As if the years I spent raising him, feeding him, and loving him had never existed. I remembered the scraped knees I kissed to make them better, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the meals I skipped so he could eat during tough times. And now, in his eyes, I was just a weight to be cast off. The wind grew stronger as the night wore on. I pulled out a thin blanket from my suitcase, damp and inadequate against the cold, but it was all I had. My body shook constantly, not just from the cold, but from shame and disbelief. Perhaps some of you know that devastating feeling when the people you gave everything to look at you as if you're worth nothing. I didn't sleep much that night. I heard cars, distant sirens, and the sound of something inside me breaking irreparably. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, the rain finally eased. I was starting to doze off when I heard approaching footsteps. They weren't hurried or heavy, but measured and determined. I lifted my head, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. Vivian, my younger sister, was standing in front of me. Her hair was soaked, her makeup was gone, but she was looking at me as if we were reuniting after an eternity. In a way, it was true. We hadn't spoken much after she moved to Miami. Life had separated us. Family complications, small resentments that grew over time, and silence. But there she was, like a miracle wrapped in a soaked coat and silent fury. Initially, she said nothing, She simply knelt beside me, pushed the wet hair from my face, and placed her hand on mine. That was the first truly human touch I had felt in weeks, maybe months. She helped me up without a word, took my suitcase, and led me to her rental car as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sitting in her car, with the heater on high and a blanket over my shoulders, I tried not to fall apart. She handed me a cup of still warm tea, smelling of honey and mint. I took a sip and felt the first glimmer of safety since I was thrown out of Matthew's house. We didn't speak until we reached the main road. "Are you coming with me?" she said simply. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. I think she saw everything in my face, in the way I held the cup of tea with both hands, as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to this world. The highway stretched out before us, long and silent. Every few miles I looked at Vivian, the same determined eyes, the same upright posture I remembered from our childhood. Vivian was always fire where I was water. She ignited when people hurt her. I held back. I survived. But that night, I started to wonder if merely surviving would be enough. When we reached a motel on the outskirts of Atlanta, she handed me the key to a room and a bag of clean clothes. I took a hot shower, the first in days, scrubbing away the rain, the dirt, and the humiliation from my skin. I looked at my reflection in the mirror until the steam completely fogged it up. Then I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but at least in a bed. The next morning, when she told me we were going to New York City, I didn't ask why, I just followed her, because something inside me had changed. Not all at once, not loudly, but enough that I could feel it. Maybe you felt it too, that silent shift, that moment when you realize, this time, I won't let it go. This time, I won't swallow my pain just to keep the peace, not when it costs me everything. I woke up to a low hotel ceiling and the constant hum of the air conditioning. The bed was very firm, the sheets scratchy, but compared to the concrete and the rain of the night before, it felt like paradise. My muscles ached, but my hands were warm for the first time in days. I sat up slowly, wrapping the motel blanket over my shoulders, trying to get my bearings. Vivian was already dressed and packing her things. She moved fast, focused, as if she had been planning something all night. She didn't ask how I slept or offer small talk. "We need to move," was all she said. I followed her to the parking lot. The sky was clear blue, the air thick with the typical Florida humidity before noon. I slid into the passenger seat, and as soon as the doors closed, she started the engine. No hesitation. 10 minutes later, we stopped at a gas station. She left the engine running and told me to wait. She came back with a fresh thermos of coffee, a bacon and egg breakfast sandwich, and a folder. She handed me the folder first. Inside was the printed listing for a property in Miami, a 2-bedroom condo, ocean view, fully furnished. The price made my stomach clench with shock. I looked at her, bewildered. "This place is yours," she said simply. "I bought it this morning." I couldn't say anything. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My hands held the folder as if it might disintegrate at any moment. Vivian kept her eyes fixed on the road. "I already transferred the money. It's in your name. No mortgage, no tricks." I flipped the page. There were photos, a balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, a kitchen with granite countertops, a guest room with a desk. It looked like the kind of place someone would stay for 2 weeks in the summer, not the kind of place a person like me would live permanently. On the last page was a bank receipt, a deposit into a new savings account, $5 million. I looked up, stunned. Your savings, Vivian explained, without taking her eyes off the road. Only yours. I saved it for years. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you know. I leaned back in the seat, the folder heavy on my lap, the coffee forgotten. My ears were ringing as if someone had set off fireworks inside my chest. I couldn't form a complete thought. The numbers were there on the page, too big to ignore, too surreal to believe. She pulled the car back onto the interstate. We didn't say anything for a long time. I watched the scenery pass by the window, shopping malls, palm trees, roadside diners. Everything looked normal, but nothing inside me felt normal. Something had profoundly changed, and I still couldn't tell if it was gratitude or shame that I felt. We turned onto a quieter road, narrow and lined with towering palm trees. After a few blocks, we reached an entrance with a closed gate. Vivian typed in a code, and the iron gate slowly swung open. A security guard waved at us, and she returned the gesture naturally. The building was only a few stories high. It was cream-coloured with white balconies and a roof of blue tile. It looked straight out of a postcard. Vivian parked in a reserved spot near the entrance, grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, and carried it inside without waiting. The lobby smelled like lemon and new carpet. A woman at the reception desk smiled and handed Vivian a welcome packet. She gestured towards me without a word. The receptionist looked at me with a kindness that reminded me of the way people look at stray dogs they wish they could help. We took the elevator in silence. On the third floor, Vivian unlocked the door to apartment 3C and pushed it open. It was brighter than I expected. The walls were a soft beige, the sofa light grey. Light poured in through the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. I walked to the railing and looked out. The ocean stretched to the horizon, merging with the sky. I could hear it, constant, powerful, alive. Behind me, Vivian set the suitcase on the floor and wiped her hands. "This is where you live now," she said. "I'll be staying in the apartment across the hall for a while, so don't get any ideas about disappearing." I turned around, my hands still on the balcony railing. I wanted to thank her, but the words felt insignificant in the face of all this. Instead, I just nodded slowly. Vivian stepped closer, her expression serious. "I know what he did. I know what they did. You don't need to talk about them if you don't want to, but you are not going to let them take anything else from you, ever again." She looked straight into my eyes. Her tone was firm, not sentimental. "This place is yours. The money is yours. And I've already contacted Grace." That got my attention. Grace Holcomb, Vivian's lawyer friend from college. Smart, ruthless, meticulous. I hadn't seen her in years. Grace is drafting the documents now. Financial lockdowns, legal protections. What you don't want exposed will be sealed, and what they try to take will be 2 steps ahead of them. I let out a slow sigh. My fingers tightened on the balcony edge. Vivian's voice softened slightly. "You're not a guest here. You're not a dependent. You are the owner, and I need you to start acting like it." I stayed on the balcony for a long time after she left. The ocean never stopped moving, and neither did the thoughts in my head. Matthew thought he had buried me, that I would silently rot in some corner of a homeless shelter. He thought the shame would keep me quiet. He had no idea I was about to take back everything he tried to steal. 3 days after moving in, Vivian organized a small welcome gathering in the downstairs clubhouse. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She simply texted me the time and told me to wear something blue. She had already bought 2 new outfits for me and hung them in the closet. I chose the long-sleeved one, a light fabric that didn't call attention to itself, but made me feel like myself again. I arrived a few minutes before 6 o'clock. The room was softly lit, with appetizers arranged on white platters and a view of the ocean through a row of glass windows. About a dozen people were present, mostly other residents of the building, retired couples, a few widows, a gentleman who reminded me of my late husband, though thinner and with a sharper chin. I didn't register most of the names, but I recognized their warmth, the kind that doesn't ask for too much too soon. Vivian made sure to keep me close. She introduced me with just enough detail to be polite, never delving into anything personal. She never mentioned what had happened. She never mentioned Matthew. She just told people I had come to Miami for a fresh start. I was near the window, watching the light disappear over the water, when the building's security guard came in through the side door. He made a slow round of the room. Then he paused when he saw me. "Elvira, that's next to Miss Vivian's place, right?" he asked, pointing to the apartment number on my name tag. I confirmed with a nod. "She's smart. Doesn't miss a detail. You've got a good person watching out for you." He lowered his voice. "You might want to keep an eye out for movement in the hall. We had a report of someone lingering around the mailboxes late last night." I felt a knot in my chest, but I thanked him for the warning. Vivian raised her glass and made a short toast, saying only that she was happy I was there, and that second chances deserved to be celebrated. People applauded, and everything felt normal, until I noticed that as she finished her speech, her eyes flicked toward the door that had just opened. I turned around and saw them, Matthew and Marissa. He was wearing a dress shirt he rarely put on, but this time it was spotless. Marissa was in beige and gold, her curly hair loose, her heels making a soft click as they entered the room. They smiled as if they belonged there. My stomach twisted into a knot. Vivian walked directly toward them. I didn't hear what she said, but her body language made it clear they were not welcome. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene, but she blocked their path like an insurmountable wall. Matthew looked over her shoulder toward me and smiled as if nothing had happened, as if the last time he saw me hadn't been in the rain, yelling as I clung to my dignity like a dying flame. I didn't say anything. My hand gripped the edge of the refreshment table so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Vivian gave a discreet signal, and an employee approached. The conversation was brief. Matthew and Marissa held their ground for a few seconds more, then turned and left. Marissa didn't even look back. The room slowly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. People noticed the interruption, but no one asked questions. I was silently grateful. Vivian came back to my side, took a piece of fruit from the platter, and said calmly, "I told you they would come." I nodded. She had warned me that morning that she'd seen a comment from a friend of Marissa's online, something too specific to be a coincidence. Vivian was already 3 steps ahead, as always. Once the gathering was over, she walked me back upstairs. We said goodnight in the hallway, and I entered my apartment. I sat on the edge of the sofa and waited. Not for anything specific. I just waited, like an animal sensing danger. They hadn't come to apologize or explain. They came to see what else they could get. But now they knew. I wasn't where they left me. I was no longer the woman who had walked out into the storm with her soaked suitcase. I was sheltered, protected, and no longer alone. Still, I didn't feel safe enough to relax. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the side drawer of the hall closet and pulled out a new notebook Vivian had given me. I clicked a pen and wrote a sentence at the top of the page. "What they took from me, they will return." I drew a line beneath it and wrote 3 words: home, name, power. The party was over, the curtain was up, and they had walked onto the stage thinking they still controlled the story. But I had the pen now, and I would write the rest. Vivian wasted no time. 2 days after the party, she knocked on my door at 10 o'clock, carrying a stack of envelopes in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression told me we were past the phase of pleasantries. She spread everything across the kitchen counter and opened the top folder. "They're going to try again," she said. "But this time, it won't be through charm. It will be legally." I watched her place the pages one by one. Letters, emails, screenshots, digital traces left by Matthew and Marissa's recent activity. Vivian had discreetly hired a private investigator to monitor any financial or legal movements involving my name. What he uncovered was subtle, but unmistakable. Matthew had contacted a small law firm in another state, inquiring about power of attorney transfers and elder care authorizations. Marissa was exchanging messages with someone about hiring a notary for at-home documentation. Vivian tapped one of the documents with her index finger. "They're going to make it look official, hand-delivered, personal. They think you're kind enough to sign something if they come in crying." She looked me straight in the eye. "I need you to do exactly what I tell you." I didn't argue, not because I was afraid, but because I now understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about misunderstandings or emotional distance. This was about control. Matthew and Marissa didn't want to help me. They wanted what they believed I no longer deserved to manage on my own. That afternoon, we invited a few neighbors over for coffee. Nothing formal, just a casual gathering with platters of fruit and sweets. Enough people to create a social environment without raising suspicion. Vivian instructed the doorman to let Matthew and Marissa up if they showed up. She didn't invite them, but she made sure someone would inform them. Then, she placed a recording device under the side table near the sofa and sat down as if we were just waiting for the weather to change. It took less than 20 minutes. Matthew knocked on the door. I opened it without hesitation. He smiled as if we were old friends reuniting. Marissa was behind him, holding a small gift bag with gold tissue paper sticking out of the top. She was wearing a light pink and pearls. They had rehearsed this meticulously. Matthew stepped in first, with effusive greetings and jokes about them just being in the neighborhood. Marissa placed the bag on the table and pulled out a tin of homemade cookies. I thanked them without emotion. Vivian watched silently from her chair. After 5 minutes of small talk, Matthew leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I brought something for you to look over," he said. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and extracted a stapled document. The first page had bold lettering across the top: Family Wellness and Property Agreement. Vivian glanced quickly at the title and crossed her legs. Matthew slid the papers across the table to me. "Just something to make things easier, so we can help, coordinate medical matters, streamline the process should anything urgent come up." He smiled again, a smile that was too long, too forced. I picked up the first page and read silently. The document was 6 pages long. In the middle, there was a paragraph labeled Temporary Power of Attorney Authorization, followed by another titled Financial Oversight Clause. The language was careful, not overtly predatory, but it gave Matthew total access to act on my behalf concerning medical and financial decisions. It also authorized him to open and manage joint access bank accounts. I placed the paper on the table without a word. Vivian stood up, walked to the kitchen, retrieved a second folder, and returned. From it, she pulled out an almost identical document, but this one had a red line marked through the middle. "This is a copy of the version you drafted last week with that paralegal in New Jersey," she told Matthew. "The original email is time-stamped. The language is word for word the same." Matthew's face froze. Marissa remained silent, her mask of sweetness beginning to crack. Vivian turned to me. "Go ahead." Ask them what this is really for. I didn't need to. The silence revealed everything. Vivian opened the recording app on her tablet and made it visible. Then she raised her voice just enough for the neighbors to hear. I want everyone to know that this document was designed to strip Elvira of her financial rights under the pretense of assistance. This is what family manipulation looks like. Matthew rose quickly. You don't understand what we're trying to do, he protested. Marissa grabbed his arm tightly. Vivian remained absolutely calm. No, I understand exactly. And the Florida State Bar Association does too. And the Ethics Council. And the community you're trying to impress with fake tears and cookies. Matthew's voice faltered. You're making a scene. Vivian laughed once, a sharp sound. Scene? No, this is clarity. She turned to me and nodded. I walked to the table. I picked up the contract they brought and slowly tore it in half, maintaining eye contact with my son. The room fell utterly silent. The neighbors stopped talking. Matthew looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes in years. Fear. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply held up the torn pages and said, "This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." Vivian gestured toward the door. Matthew and Marissa left, this time without looking back. I sat down slowly, my hands still warm from the paper. Vivian brought me a glass of water. The neighbors murmured, then politely excused themselves and departed. When the room was empty, Vivian spoke in a low voice. They'll try something else. I nodded. I knew that too. But what they didn't know was that we were now ahead of the game, and I wasn't just holding the line. I was ready to take back everything, piece by piece, name by name. And this time, they would never see what was coming. 3 mornings after I tore their contract in half, I opened the front door and found a white orchid on the doormat. No card, no note, just the plant, delicate and perfect, like a silent apology that lacked the courage to call. I stood there for a long time, not touching it. The air was warm, the hallway quiet. Across the hall, Vivian's door opened. She stepped out, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She saw the orchid and stopped. They're changing tactics, she said, without even blinking. I nodded once and left the plant where it was. I went back inside, locked the door, and gave myself over to the silence. I knew what that orchid meant. It wasn't an apology. It was a probe. That night they came again, this time not together. Matthew showed up around 6 o'clock, wearing a blue polo shirt I remembered buying him for a job interview that never worked out. His smile was more contained than usual. He carried a small paper bag from the Italian restaurant on the main street. He said he figured I hadn't eaten dinner yet. I didn't open the screen door. He stood there for a while, saying I looked well, asking if I liked the neighborhood, claiming that he and Marissa had been talking, that they felt terrible about how things had escalated. He said he missed me. I didn't say anything. Eventually, he left the bag on the bench near the wall and walked away. I watched his departure without moving. The next morning was Marissa's turn. She appeared shortly before noon with a shopping bag and a book tucked under her arm. Her tone was lighter, almost casual, as if this were something she always did. She didn't mention the torn contract. She didn't mention the party. She just said she wanted to stop by and see me, maybe help with chores, cook something if I was tired. She used to call me by my first name. That day, she called me Mum. I watched her through the peephole until she gave up and left. She took the groceries with her. She left the book. A week went by like this. One would come, then the other, sometimes with food, sometimes with flowers. Once they left a framed photo of Matthew as a boy holding a fishing rod next to me on a pier. a memory they thought could be used as an emotional weapon. I didn't respond, but I watched and recorded everything. Vivian gave me a small device, no bigger than a car key. It stayed near the door, always on when someone approached. I didn't use it to catch them saying anything explicitly criminal. I used it to log the tone, the hesitations, the patterns, because their words weren't about repair. They were about access. Every conversation circled around comfort, concern, and eventually logistics, accounts, end-of-life planning, the language of thieves pretending to be caregivers. Vivian collected the recordings and shared them with Grace. The lawyer didn't say much initially. She just listened, took notes, asked about correspondence, emails, calls. Then she uncovered something alarming. Matthew had submitted a change of address request for my bank correspondence. He had done it online using an old phone number that was linked to my name years ago. Grace found it through an informal check she requested from a bank contact. It hadn't been processed yet, but it was a clear red flag. Vivian changed the mailbox locks the next day. The night after that, the fire alarm in my hallway went off around 2 o'clock in the morning. There was no fire, just a pulled lever. Ramirez, the night guard, reviewed the security camera and caught a blurred figure walking down the service hall 20 minutes earlier. He couldn't see the face, but he could make out the jacket, the same one Matthew wore to the party. I asked Vivian to call Grace again. She brought a laptop the next day and walked me through setting up secure digital alerts. Any attempted access to my accounts, any login from an unrecognized device, any file request linked to my name. I agreed to all measures. I asked her if she thought they had given up. She didn't answer immediately. "They're going to try the back door now," she finally said. I asked what that meant. "They're going to try legally again, but not directly. They're going to find someone to do it for them. A notary, a mobile witness, a financial advisor who doesn't know the full story." 2 days later, a man in dress pants and a collared shirt knocked on my door. He said he represented an elder planning group. He claimed my family had requested a quick review of my estate plan, just to make sure everything was in order. He smiled, as if it were perfectly normal for 70-something women to receive surprise visits from well-dressed strangers, holding folders and government documents. I informed him I already had a legal team and closed the door. He left quickly. Grace filed a formal complaint the next morning with the State Office of Professional Guardianship in Florida. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create a record, a documented trail. I knew what was happening. They were trying to make me look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable. Because if they couldn't get me to sign voluntarily, they would try to prove I didn't have the capacity to handle my own affairs. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the deed to the apartment. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I whispered my name out loud, not for drama, but for clarity. Then I put the document back in its folder, closed the drawer, and locked it. The doorbell rang again later that week. This time, Matthew brought wine. Marissa waited near the elevator. He didn't ask to come in. He asked to talk. He said things had been difficult. He said family should stick together. He said maybe we could talk about some practical things. I didn't open the door fully. I only spoke through the crack. "Don't come back." His voice faltered, not with sadness, but with anger disguised as confusion. I didn't respond. I waited. He left. I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and made a list. 3 columns: what they tried, what failed, what would never be forgiven. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was documenting, preparing. The storm had passed, but the damage it left would serve as evidence, and I would be the one to carry it forward, piece by piece, until they had nothing left to claim. When the envelope arrived, it came in a plain white package. No return address, no postmark, just slipped under my door, like a silent threat. I found it early in the morning while making tea, still half asleep, my sandals shuffling on the cold floor. At first, I thought it might be another apology letter or a card from one of the ladies at the book club, but the weight told me otherwise. It wasn't soft. It wasn't personal. It was stiff, heavy inside. It wasn't a letter. It was 6 printed pages, stapled, every page filled with legal language designed to confuse, to intimidate. They had hired a lawyer, or at least they wanted me to think so. The letter alleged that for health and safety reasons, Matthew and Marissa were filing a request for guardianship review. They claimed to have evidence of mental deterioration and that they were concerned for my well-being. They said my recent financial decisions had been erratic and could pose a danger to myself and others. I sat down slowly, rereading that line 3 times. It said my decisions were erratic. Me, the woman who managed the budget for an emergency clinic for over a decade. The one who handled bills and vendor disputes while my husband worked nights. The one who stretched 2 modest retirements through a severe market crash. And they were calling me unstable. I didn't cry. I laughed. Then I picked up the phone and called Vivian. By noon, Grace was at my door with a copy of the same letter that had also been sent to Vivian's law firm. They tried to send it there too, probably hoping she would panic or pressure me to give in. They didn't understand who Vivian really was. Grace put her laptop on the counter and opened a document titled Protective Response Packet. The process was already underway. She was just inserting the final elements: transcripts, photographs, the audio recording of Matthew's visit, copies of checks they sent me weeks earlier, with small annotations on the memo lines that said things like, "Just in case you need help deciding." Grace read the letter with studied calm, pointing out phrases clearly lifted from online legal templates. Some of the claims didn't even align with actual Florida law. They lacked detail. The terminology was misused. "They want to scare you," Grace said. "This isn't about your health, it's about control." I nodded. We didn't need to file anything officially yet, but Grace contacted a friend at the courthouse to preemptively log all the materials. If anything formal arose, we would be prepared. By the end of the day, Vivian had sent a formal response, drafted like a razor wrapped in velvet, warm yet firm, the kind of letter that doesn't just refute, it warned. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I called my doctor, not because I was concerned, but because I wanted official records. I scheduled a full cognitive exam and a wellness panel, set for that same week. I passed them all with flying colours: stable blood pressure, steady reflexes, sharp memory, processing speed even faster than most people half my age. 2 days later, the results were in a folder in Grace's hands. I asked her to make 3 copies. I sent one to Matthew. No note, just the report. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no visits, no letters slipped under my door. For a moment I thought perhaps they had backed off, but that was my mistake, because while I savoured the silence, they were busy elsewhere. Vivian got the alert first. She had set up a monitoring system through the county recorder's office. Any time a lien, inquiry, or dispute was logged with my name or address, she would be notified. That's how we discovered they had submitted a request to the bank holding my savings account. They were trying to register as co-beneficiaries. It wasn't a legal move, it was a desperate one. Marissa had called pretending to be me, claiming she'd forgotten her online access and asking to update the beneficiaries over the phone. The clerk immediately flagged the attempt as suspicious. My age and voice pattern didn't match. The bank froze the request and logged it as an incident, but the fact that they had tried showed how far they were willing to go. They no longer even cared how desperate they looked. I looked at the bank report for a long time that night, not with anger, just with a contemplative stillness. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about erasing me. They wanted my freedom, my dignity, my name on paper in ink beside theirs. Proof that they had power, that I needed them. Vivian and Grace arranged for all accounts to be legally armoured with third-party oversight. No new names, no unauthorised beneficiaries. Everything would be transferred to a foundation if anything happened to me, one I had discreetly created months before. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring no one could ever control me again. Later that week, Grace handed me another envelope, thicker than the last. Inside were 2 sworn affidavits, one from my old landlord and one from a neighbour. Witnesses to the nights Matthew and Marissa left me outside, refused to open the door, told the children I was being dramatic. There was also a notarized statement from the community nurse who saw my bruises when I fell. She confirmed that no one from my family showed up to collect me from the urgent care clinic. They wanted to build a case against me. I was already building a wall around myself, brick by brick, document by document, truth by truth, and each page was more damning than the last. There was a sentence in Grace's summary that stayed with me. Attackers with shallow motives underestimate the power of a long memory. She was right. I remembered everything. And now the court did too. The law did too. And soon they would remember it as well. The invitation came from Matthew. A simple text message, short and polite. He asked if I would be willing to come to dinner at their house the following Sunday. He said the children missed me. He said they'd like to start over. He ended the message with a hopeful line about family and forgiveness. I looked at those words for a long time, letting them settle. I knew what it was. I had seen the pattern forming. Vivian had seen it. Grace had predicted it almost exactly. They tried legal pressure. That failed. The false guardianship attempt didn't stick. The beneficiary trick was discovered and blocked, and now came the charm offensive. Still, I accepted. I told him I would be there at 6 o'clock. On Sunday, I wore a discreet navy blue dress, high-necked and long-sleeved. I pulled my hair back and wore my gold watch, the one Charles gave me for our 25th anniversary. I carried nothing but a thin envelope in my purse and my most serene expression. The house hadn't changed. White siding, a new roof, a wreath on the door, as if those details could hide the bitterness soaked into the walls. Marissa greeted me with a tight smile. Her eyes scanned my outfit, trying to read it as a sign. She stepped aside, permitting my entrance with a hand on my back, firm and controlling. The dining room table was set for 7 people. Matthew sat at the head. The children were dressed up, their shirts too formal for a Sunday, their eyes alternating between me and their parents. We sat. We ate. The food was good, a little too perfect. They talked about the children's grades, about how Matthew was considering a job change. Marissa complimented the dish she had made twice, in a tone that pleaded for approval. I nodded politely. I answered when asked. I didn't mention anything from the last few months, and neither did they, at least not directly. Halfway through dessert, Matthew leaned back in his chair and let out a carefully rehearsed sigh. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about how things got so complicated, and I know we all made mistakes, but I hate the distance between us. Marissa reached out to take his hand and, with the kids growing up, she added, we just don't want regrets. We want them to know how a real family behaves. I nodded. I appreciate that, I replied. I really do. They smiled, and then Matthew finally got to the point. I was wondering, Mum, If at some point we could talk about moving forward, maybe revisit some of the decisions that were made when things were tense, especially concerning estate matters. There it was, the velvet glove removed, revealing the hand that had always been underneath. I let the silence linger just long enough. Then I picked up my purse and pulled out the envelope. "Sure," I said calmly, "but I think it's best if we're all perfectly clear, so I prepared something." I slid the envelope across the table. Marissa's fingers twitched before she could control the movement. Matthew opened the envelope. Inside was a legally notarized addendum. It outlined the permanent establishment of the Elvira Holmes Foundation, the non-profit organization I had officially formed. It confirmed that the condo where I now lived, the bank accounts, the trust fund, everything, was legally and irrevocably linked to the foundation. It listed the beneficiaries: a scholarship program for single mothers over 60 years old, an assistance fund for elder abuse victims, and a community medical assistance program in Charles's name. Matthew's face hardened. Marissa's smile cracked at the edges. "Look," I explained softly, "I've done a lot of thinking too, and I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life worrying about who deserves what, or who thinks they earned a piece of something they never helped rebuild." Matthew swallowed. I could see the heat rising behind his eyes. He was restraining himself, trying to maintain composure. "I'm not cutting you off entirely," I added, "but I am choosing peace, clarity, and protection." No one said anything. The children remained still, confused, too young to understand the undercurrents, but old enough to feel the tension that settled thickly in the air. I stood up slowly. "Dinner was delicious. Thank you." Marissa started to speak, but the words stumbled. She tried to smile again, but gave up halfway. At the front door, Matthew followed me. "Is this it?" he asked quietly. I kept walking. "Mum," he said again, a little louder, a little sharper. "We were trying to make things right." I turned around finally. "No," I replied calmly. "You did this." His shoulders dropped as if, for the first time, he realized he couldn't shift the blame to me. "I didn't think it would go this far," he murmured. I nodded. "That's the thing about boundaries. Once you cross them, you don't get to decide where they end." He seemed to want to say more, but he closed his mouth. Vivian walked up to my side. "We should head back inside." And we did. When the judge returned, he didn't hesitate. Motion granted. The falsified documents were declared void. The Foundation's charter was protected. A formal recommendation was sent to the district attorney's office for further investigation. And with that, it was over, at least in the eyes of the court. But for me, it was something deeper. I had positioned myself in front of a system that, historically, overlooked women like me, dismissed our voices, assumed we were too fragile or confused or too emotional. And I had been heard. I didn't win because I yelled the loudest. I won because I refused to look away. I won because I kept my records, I spoke the truth, and I trusted the silence to do its work. That night, I sat on the balcony with Vivian and Grace. We shared peach pie and let the sea breeze drift in. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The truth had spoken for us, and for the first time, it was enough. 3 weeks after the verdict, I walked up onto the small stage at the new community centre, holding a microphone with hands that no longer trembled. Before me, there were almost 100 faces. Some I knew well. Some I had helped through hard winters, drawn-out divorces, or lonely birthdays. Some I had never met, but they were there because the foundation had reached them somehow. That was enough. The space wasn't fancy. Folding chairs, coffee thermoses on plastic tables, a few old ceiling fans whirring above. But the walls were freshly painted and decorated with photos of our programs. Women learning trades, elder care volunteers, patients, children laughing next to carefully packed donation boxes. I didn't prepare a formal speech. I didn't want to make a show. I just spoke the truth. This organization was never about money, I began slowly, pausing to steady my breath. It was about not being erased, about proving that the second half of life is worth the first, maybe even more. They applauded, but I didn't let the moment linger. I handed the microphone to Liana and stepped off the stage. She represented the future now. Her voice, her leadership, her energy. I had built the foundation. They would raise the rest. After the event, people stayed. Some cried. Some hugged me. One woman handed me a note that simply read, "Because of you, I had the courage to ask for custody of my grandson." I tucked the note into my coat pocket and quietly slipped out the back door. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my garden. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest is an act of faith, not in yourself, but in the world that will come after you. If you have ever felt discarded, made invisible, or underestimated just because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, remember this. You still have the power to draw boundaries, to reclaim your space, to plant something new. Even when the world tries to convince you that your time has passed. Matthew never contacted me again. For a long time, I imagined some grand apology, an emotional call, a letter full of regret, but it never came. Instead, I received a package from his lawyer. Inside was a signed agreement term, relinquishing any remaining claims on the foundation or the properties still in my name. No note, no explanation. He had chosen silence instead of redemption. I accepted it, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. The chapter of him in my life had ended long ago. He just hadn't realized it until the door closed behind him. The next morning, I donated his last childhood belongings to the local shelter's thrift store. Not out of anger, just out of clarity. Some things don't need to be kept. They need to be released. In the following days, I began walking every morning, 3 miles at dawn, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors who joined me in respectful silence. We never talked about what had happened. We didn't need to. They had followed the story unfold in the papers, on TV, through whispered comments in the supermarket aisles. But walking beside me was a form of unstated respect, and that was worth more than any formal apology. One morning, on the trail behind the orchard, I saw a young woman sitting on a bench with her small son. She looked exhausted, as if the world had rested on her shoulders for too long. As I walked past, she called out to me. "Are you Elvira, right? The woman who fought her family?" I smiled gently. "I am Elvira, but I didn't fight. I just refused to disappear." Her eyes welled up. "Thank you," she whispered. That was all. No more words were needed. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my garden. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest is an act of faith. Not in yourself, but in the world that will come after you. Grace visited us again that weekend. We had tea, laughed at a news segment that had mispronounced her name, and talked about organizing a writing workshop for retired women next spring. "Stories," she said, "are the last thing they can't steal." When she left, I stood at the window watching the wind move the leaves on the trees, the kind of wind that doesn't knock things down, but reminds them that they can stand tall. The knock on the door came 3 months after the verdict. I opened it without hesitation. Olivia, Marissa's sister, was standing there, looking smaller than I remembered. "They're getting a divorce," she said without preamble. I didn't respond. "Matthew's living in an apartment downtown. He went back to teaching. Marissa's selling the house." I nodded, waiting for her to get to the point. Olivia seemed unsure, fiddling with her purse strap. "The boys ask about you," she finally said. "Thought you'd want to know." I thanked her for the information and offered her a coffee. She politely refused. "You were right, you know," she said as she turned to leave. "About everything." I closed the door gently behind her. It wasn't about being right. It never was. 3 weeks later, I received a postcard. No return address, just my address. On the back, a single line written in masculine handwriting. "I understand now." I put the card away in a drawer, not for sentimentality, but as a reminder. The most important battles don't end with trumpets and fanfare. They end in silence, in recognition, in subtle shifts that take years to fully manifest. Today, the Elvira Holmes Foundation serves more than 500 women a year. We have 3 branches and a mentorship program connecting women over 60 years old with young students. We received a small grant from the city government. We raised enough donations to purchase a modest building downtown. Some mornings, when the sun is still low and the beach is mostly empty, I walk down to the water's edge and remember that night under the overpass, drenched in rain, invisible to the world. I remember the woman I was, trembling with cold and shame. And then I look at the woman I have become. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer silent when it matters. I no longer pretend that love must mean erasure. The water still washes the sand, constant, relentless. The waves still come, still go. But now, when I go home, I don't check the locks twice. I don't worry about what they might steal from me. Because I've found that at 72 years old, I've learned something I wish I had known at 20. True dignity is not something others can take away from you. It is something you take back, inch by inch, when you finally decide to stand up. If my story touched any part of your heart today, remember, you are not finished. You are not invisible. You are still writing your story. And maybe, just maybe, it's about to begin. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video popping up on the screen, because in it, there's a story of betrayal and a twist like you've never seen before.